The music hall was full of rich people, well-dressed guests, and talented performers. It was a grand evening at a famous music school. People laughed, held drinks, and spoke in soft, polite voices. Everyone was waiting for the final performances. To begin, the hall sparkled with lights, and the air was filled with soft background music. In one quiet corner, near the back, stood an old woman. Her name was Sister Catherine. She wore a plain gray habit and simple shoes. She didn't look like the others in the room. No jewelry, no makeup, just soft eyes and a gentle smile. Some people noticed her and stared for a moment, but no one walked over to greet her. She didn't mind. She stood calmly, her eyes on the grand piano on the stage. The piano was large, shiny, and beautiful. It sat under a spotlight, waiting for someone special to play it. Catherine looked at it the way a mother looks at her child, with love and silence. After a while, she quietly walked up to one of the young event staff and asked, "Excuse me, may I play one song at the end?" The young woman looked surprised. She was polite but confused. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Are you on the list?" "No," Catherine said softly. "But I would like to share something, just once." The girl smiled awkwardly and said, "I don't think the organizers will allow it." Then she walked away to speak with someone else. Nearby, a group of students laughed. They had noticed the old nun and her simple clothes. "Maybe she thinks it's a church piano," one of them joked. She played Twinkle, Twinkle. "And bless us after," another laughed. Catherine heard them, but didn't react. She had heard worse in life, much worse. A famous pianist, who had performed earlier that night, walked past her and smirked. "Sister, maybe save your magic for a morning prayer," he said, trying to be clever again. Catherine just nodded gently and thanked him. To many, she looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake. An old nun, probably retired, with no place among talented young artists and big names. But the truth was something else. She stood there for over an hour, watching every performer with calm interest. Some played fast and loud, others slow and emotional. Some hit wrong notes, but the crowd still clapped. Some smiled proudly, soaking in the applause. Catherine clapped for each one with kindness, even when others didn't, as the night went on. Some people began to notice her again, not because of her age or clothes, but because of her quiet patience. She didn't seem upset. She didn't try to force her way onto the stage. But her eyes never left the piano. Later, when the host walked near her, Catherine gently asked again, "If there is time left at the end, may I share a piece?" The host looked at her kindly, but with doubt. "It's a very full program, sister," he said. "I don't want to offend you, but these are trained musicians." "You understand?" "I understand," she said with a smile. "I only ask once. More, I'll think about it," the host said, and walked off, clearly not planning to allow it. Some guests nearby whispered, "That old nun wants to play. That's ridiculous. She'll fall asleep before she even finishes." Another joked, "Maybe she just wants to touch the piano once in her life." Someone else said. Still, Catherine said nothing. She sat down near the stage and closed her eyes for a few minutes. No one knew what she was thinking. No one asked. The night continued, and performers came and went. The music was beautiful, but something was missing. The crowd clapped, but they weren't moved. It felt more like a show than a feeling, and through it all, Sister Catherine sat like a stone, still, quiet, and smiling. She wasn't there to take the spotlight. She wasn't there to prove anyone wrong. She had lived through wars, loss, hunger, and silence. This wasn't new to her, but in her heart, the music had never left. Her fingers still remembered every key, every sound, every emotion. She didn't need to beg. She didn't need to argue. She just waited, because sometimes the world has to be quiet long enough to truly hear, and the moment to listen was slowly coming closer. The whispers started spreading across the room like smoke. quiet but poisonous. A few people had seen the old nun asking if she could play the piano. They found it amusing, not serious. She wants to play the piano. Someone said with a laugh. Maybe she thinks this is a church choir night, another joked. The performers, many of them young and proud, began to whisper to each other. Some were music students, some professionals. But all believed they had earned their place on that stage, an old woman like her. She didn't belong, not in their eyes. One of the younger girls, wearing a sparkling red dress, laughed and said, "If she plays, I swear I'll faint from secondhand embarrassment." A few nodded, smiling. The idea of the nun playing was like a comedy sketch to them. They thought she would play a few clumsy notes, get confused, and apologize. Someone even said she might hit the wrong key and call it a prayer. And they all laughed again. In another corner, a boy told his date. "It's cute that she's brave enough to ask. But come on, this isn't a retirement home." Even though no one had heard her play yet, they had already made up their minds. They judged her because of her age, her simple clothes, her quiet voice. The organizer, Mr. Reynolds, finally came back. To Sister Catherine, he had spoken with others and now felt more pressure to say no. "Sister," he said kindly but firmly, "I appreciate your patience. But tonight's performers have been chosen carefully. They've practiced for months, and well. People paid to see them." Catherine looked at him, her eyes gentle but deep. "I understand," she said, "but music is not always about being chosen." He paused, not knowing what to say. Her words touched something, but he still had a schedule to keep. "Maybe next time," he added quickly, walking off, hoping that would end the matter. But she didn't look hurt or angry. She simply nodded, folded her hands, and sat back down. A little girl nearby, sitting with her family, noticed her mama. She whispered, "Who is that lady?" The mother smiled softly. "Just a nun, sweetheart, probably here to watch." The girl tilted her head. "She looks like she wants to play." The mother looked again, then shrugged. "Maybe. People like her don't usually perform." Those words echoed quietly in the air. People like her, old, plain, unseen. But Sister Catherine heard it all and still. She smiled. A few performers walked past her on their way to the stage. One of them, a tall young man named Jordan, stopped for a second and said, "No hard feelings, sister, but tonight's about energy and performance, d'you know?" She looked up at him and said softly, "Energy can come from silence too." Jordan blinked, unsure how to respond. He just gave a nervous laugh and walked away. More time passed, and more music filled the room. Some songs were fast and flashy. Others were slow and dramatic, but most of them felt like shows. They didn't feel like stories. They didn't feel. Real people clapped politely. Some cheered, but the crowd was starting to grow tired. Catherine continued watching, her face calm. Her hands rested in her lap, but every now and then, one finger would move slightly, like it was playing an invisible key. Even when ignored, even when laughed at, she wasn't bitter. She had lived through years of being unseen. She knew how to wait. Music had taught her patience. Life had taught her humility. A woman sitting nearby leaned over and asked, "Have you played before?" Catherine smiled, only for those who would listen. That answer made the woman pause. She looked at the nun again, really looked. Her skin was wrinkled, her hair white. But her eyes, they had the same fire as any young performer. A fire that had been pushed down, hidden, but not gone. Later that evening, a piano technician came on stage to tune the instrument briefly. As he touched the keys, they made a loud echo. It reminded everyone how powerful the piano really was. From her seat, Catherine's eyes lit up. Her breath caught just slightly. Her hands tightened in her lap. It was like she heard the piano calling her name. But again, no one called her. No one invited her to try. To the crowd, she was invisible. To a few, she was a joke. But to the piano, she was still a musician. And the night wasn't over yet. The seat beside her stayed empty, as if waiting, and somewhere deep in the hall, something unseen had begun to change, because sometimes, when enough people laugh at someone, the silence that follows becomes very loud, and sometimes the loudest moment of the night comes from the quietest person in the room. That night, when the crowd left and the lights in the hall turned off one by one, Sister Catherine walked slowly to her small room in the convent nearby. Her footsteps were soft on the stone floor, but her mind was loud with memories. She didn't feel angry. She wasn't sad either, just quiet, as if something deep inside her had been shaken a little. Inside her room, there was very little. A wooden bed, a desk, a Bible, and in the corner, an old upright piano with 3 broken keys and faded paint. She walked over to the piano and sat down slowly. Her hands rested gently on the keys, like greeting an old friend. For a moment, she didn't move. She closed her eyes and let the silence fill the room. Then, very softly, she began to play. The notes were slow, like raindrops falling in a quiet night. Her fingers moved with care, like they remembered the path even after all these years. No one clapped, no one listened, but the sound was alive, full of feeling as she played. Her mind drifted back decades, back to a time when her hands were younger and the world was different. She was just a little girl then, about 7 years old, living in a poor village. Her father was a carpenter, her mother a school teacher. They didn't have much, but they had an old piano someone had left behind. Catherine loved that piano more than toys, more than sweets. She would sit for hours pressing keys, listening to sounds, learning without even knowing she was learning. By age 10, she could play anything she heard. People in the village called her a gift from God. One day, a man from the city came and heard her playing in church. He said she was a rare talent. He offered to take her to a music academy. Her parents cried with joy. They sold some of their things to help send her. It was a big chance, maybe the biggest ever, at the academy. Young Catherine worked harder than anyone. She practiced day and night. Her teachers said she could become one of the world's best. Then came the war. One night, a bomb fell near the school. She ran home only to find ashes. Her house was gone, her parents gone. She was alone, homeless, and far from everything she knew. She lived in a shelter for weeks, holding on to nothing but the clothes she wore and the music in her mind. Later, she was taken in by a group of nuns. They gave her food, a bed, and care. They didn't ask for anything, just kindness in return. Catherine stayed, and over time, she became one of them. She gave up her dream of fame, not because she was forced to, but because the world needed something else from her. She began teaching music to children in orphanages. She never charged money, never asked for praise. For years, she played in small rooms for small hearts children who had no one. Children like her. Music was no longer about the stage. It was about healing, about connection. But even though she never chased glory, the piano inside her never died. Her fingers still danced when no one was looking. She never told anyone her full story, not even the young nuns who looked up to her. They only knew her as Sister Catherine. Kind, patient, with hands that sometimes touched the piano like it was made of glass. Now, sitting at her old piano, she opened her eyes. The music slowed and stopped. She looked down at her hands, older now, lined with age, but still strong. "I haven't changed," she whispered to herself. "Just grown." She smiled a little, not because of pride, but because she remembered who she really was. Not just a nun, not just a teacher, but a musician, a soul shaped by keys and chords, a spirit made whole through sound. The laughter from the party earlier still echoed in her ears, but it didn't hurt. They didn't know her. That was all. They only saw an old woman, not the child who once made concert halls go silent. But maybe, just maybe, she would play again. Not for applause, not for fame, but to remind the world that true music has no age, no face, no costume. It lives in the heart, and when ready, it finds a way to be heard. She closed the piano lid gently, stood up, and walked to her window. The stars were out, bright and still. She whispered a prayer under her breath. Then she smiled again. "If they let me touch that piano," she said softly, "I'll let it speak for me." And in the quiet of that little room, the night listened. The music event entered its final hour. The crowd was still there, but the energy had dropped. Some performances ran too long, some acts repeated old songs, and one scheduled guest didn't show up at all. Behind the scenes, the organizer, Mr. Reynolds, looked stressed. He checked his list again and again. There was a sudden 5-minute gap that needed to be filled. "We need someone, anyone," he said to his assistant. "We can't have silence. The audience will lose interest." The assistant looked around. "Should I ask one of the students to play something again?" Before he could answer, a voice from behind said quietly, "I'm still here." It was Sister Catherine, standing calmly, hands folded, eyes steady. Mr. Reynolds stared for a moment, remembering how he had already turned her down, but now, with no one ready and time running out, he hesitated. The assistant whispered, "Let her try, sir, just for 5 minutes. If it's bad, we say thank you and move on." Another staff member, clearly amused, laughed and said, "Well, it'll at least be a funny moment. The audience might enjoy the surprise." Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Fine, 5 minutes, just 5. He turned to Sister Catherine. "The piano is yours for one piece only." She smiled. "That's all I need." The announcement was made quickly and without excitement. "Please welcome." "Sister Catherine," the host said, trying to hide his doubt. The room buzzed with low laughter. Some clapped politely, others smirked. One girl leaned over and whispered, "Get ready for the church lullaby." Sister Catherine walked slowly toward the stage. Her steps were careful but steady. She looked small under the bright lights, but her presence somehow made the room quieter. She reached the piano, placed her hands on the edge, and gently slid onto the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Not moving yet, the crowd waited, some with interest, most with low expectations. Then she looked up for just a moment, not at the audience, but at the ceiling, as if listening for something, and then she played. The first note was soft and full, not loud, not rushed. It came out like a breath, like a word spoken in a dream. Then another note followed, and another, and within seconds a melody began to form. Not flashy, not quick, but deep and alive. The room changed. The air felt heavier, like time had slowed down. People who were whispering stopped mid-sentence. The song grew layer by layer. Her fingers moved faster now, but never lost control. Every sound was full of feeling. Every key touched like it had meaning. Eyes widened in the audience. Some sat up straighter, some forgot to breathe. "She's good," someone whispered. "No, she's incredible," said another. One older man stood up slightly to see better. His hands trembled. He had spent years teaching music and hadn't heard something this honest in decades. The jokes stopped, the smirks vanished. All eyes were on her, and only her. Sister Catherine's face showed no pride, no fear, just calm and focus. Her hands were telling a story of loss, love, and hope without words. The piano responded to her like it knew her touch, like it had waited for her. The music rose, reached a peak, and then began to fall gently like a soft wave going back to sea. As the last note faded, the hall stayed quiet for a long moment. No one moved. Then, slowly, someone began to clap, then another, and another, and in seconds, the room exploded into applause. People stood, tears in their eyes. Hands clapped harder than they had all night. The same students who laughed now looked speechless. Some stared at the floor, ashamed. Mr. Reynolds put a hand to his mouth, shocked. And moved, Sister Catherine stood up, bowed her head once, and turned to leave the stage. No fancy words, no thank you speech. She didn't need them. The music had spoken louder than anything she could say. As she stepped down, the crowd kept clapping. Some tried to speak to her, but she just smiled and walked toward the back. The girl in the red dress, who had joked earlier, now had tears running down her cheek. She whispered, "I was so wrong," and in that moment, everyone in the room knew this wasn't just an old nun. This was a woman who had carried a lifetime of music in silence. And when she finally touched the keys, she didn't just play. She reminded the world what real music feels like. The first note fell like a tear, soft and slow. It touched the heart before it reached the ears. Sister Catherine sat at the piano with quiet grace. Her body didn't move much, but her hands were alive. Her fingers danced on the keys like they were telling a secret only the soul could understand. The audience, who had once laughed, now sat frozen. No one expected this, not from her, not from anyone. Each note she played was full of emotion. They weren't just sounds, they were feelings, turned into music. People forgot where they were. It didn't feel like a concert anymore. It felt like they were being told a beautiful story without words. A story of someone who had lived through storms, through silence, through deep sadness, and still chose to sing. Catherine's hands moved faster now, her fingers gliding across the keys with a grace that only comes from years of practice and years of pain. She didn't look at the audience. She didn't need to. Her eyes were closed, her head slightly tilted as if listening to something far away. The crowd was silent, so silent that even a whisper would have felt too loud. Even the waiters and staff stopped moving. One man in the back, who had worked in that hall for years, whispered, "This is not just a performance, it's a prayer." A little boy in the front row, who had been bored all evening, leaned forward with wide eyes. He had never seen anyone play like that, not even on TV. The music rose higher, growing stronger. It felt like waves crashing on a shore, big and powerful, but never out of control. People began to feel something they hadn't felt in a long time. Truth. Not the kind you read in books or hear in speeches, but the kind you feel deep in your chest when something touches your soul. Some audience members wiped their eyes, not even knowing why they were crying. The young girl in the red dress, who had laughed before, held her hands over her mouth. Her heart felt like it had been squeezed. This wasn't just music. This was healing. The man who joked about the church lullaby now stared at the floor, shame burning on his face. A music professor, known for being cold and hard to impress, had tears running down his cheeks. He whispered to himself, "I forgot music could do this." And all the while, Sister Catherine kept playing the piano, which had been silent for most of the night, now sang louder than it ever had. It wasn't just her hands that were playing. It was her whole life, every memory, every scar, every prayer pouring through the keys. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just sharing, giving a gift from the quiet corners of her heart. The melody slowed, gently, like the final pages of a story being turned. The high notes faded into soft ones, like the sun setting behind a hill. And then, at last, came the final note. It was soft, but full. It held everything: joy, sorrow, love, loss, all wrapped in one sound. And then, silence. A deep, powerful silence. No one moved, no one spoke. The air felt holy, like something sacred had just happened. Then, slowly, a single pair of hands began to clap, then another and another. In moments, the entire hall stood on their feet. The applause wasn't just loud, it was thunder. Some clapped with tears in their eyes, others with hands over their hearts. It wasn't the kind of clapping people do at a show. It was the kind people give when they've just witnessed something unforgettable. Mr. Reynolds, the event organizer, had his hand over his mouth. His eyes were wet. He looked at the nun and whispered, "I was so wrong." Even the famous pianist who had laughed earlier now stood in awe. His pride shattered, replaced by respect. Catherine stood from the bench, bowed her head once, and stepped down from the stage without saying, "Oh," a word. She didn't wait for more applause. She didn't smile for the cameras. She had come to give, not to take. And now that her song was finished, she left the stage as quietly as she had entered. But in the hearts of everyone in that room, she didn't leave. Her music stayed, echoing inside them, reminding them what real beauty feels like. The tiny old nun they had ignored had touched them all. Not with speeches or fame, but with truth. A truth made of melody and silence. A truth too strong to forget. And as she walked back to her seat, the piano behind her seemed to glow under the lights, like it too had been waiting for her all this time as the last note faded into silence. The room held its breath. The sound was gone, but its feeling still floated in the air like soft mist. No, one moved not for several seconds. It was as if time had stopped. Then clap. A single person started clapping, and another joined within seconds. The whole room burst into applause, but this time it wasn't the kind of clapping people do to be polite. It was real. It was powerful. It came from deep inside their hearts. People stood up, one by one, until the entire audience was on their feet. Tears rolled down faces. Some clapped with shaking hands. Others with both hands over their hearts. They had been touched, not just by music, but by something greater, something pure and honest. The same people who had laughed before now couldn't look at each other. Their pride was gone, their arrogance replaced by shame and awe. The woman in the red dress had tears in her eyes. She whispered to her friend, "I didn't know. I had no idea." A young boy, barely 10, looked at his father and asked, "How did she do that?" It felt like magic. His father, still clapping, simply nodded, because it was. Sister Catherine slowly stood up from the piano bench. She bowed her head with calm grace. Not proud, just thankful. She did not raise her arms. She did not smile wide. She simply gave one small bow and turned to walk off stage. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't crave the attention. She had already shared her heart, and that was enough. Mr. Reynolds, the organizer, watched her from the side of the stage. His mouth was slightly open and his eyes were wet. He rushed to her as she stepped down. "Sister," he said softly, "please forgive me. I misjudged you. I had no idea." Catherine gently placed a hand on his arm. "You had no reason to know," she said kindly. "Tonight, the music spoke, not me." He nodded, ashamed but grateful. "Would you consider playing again? I mean, maybe for our next event." She gave a small smile. "We'll see." People in the audience started moving closer, hoping to speak to her, thank her, touch her hand, but she gently stepped back. She wasn't there to become a celebrity. She walked quietly toward the back of the hall, and the crowd parted for her. Some bowed their heads as she passed, as if in the presence of something holy. In one corner, the famous pianist who had earlier made fun of her stood silently. He didn't try to speak. He only lowered his eyes in respect. His fingers, once proud and sure, now felt small. He had played for applause, but she had played for truth. A young student ran after her, holding a music sheet. "Sister, can I learn from you? Please." Catherine stopped, looked at the girl, and said gently, "You already have. Just remember, play with your heart, not your hands." The girl nodded, tears filling her eyes. Later, outside the building, a crowd had gathered near the entrance. People still talking about what they had just heard. Phones buzzed with recordings. Social media posts popped up within minutes. Elderly nun brings entire hall to tears. Read one caption. Videos began spreading fast. Some people called it a miracle. Others said it was the best performance they had ever witnessed. Inside, Mr. Reynolds met with his staff, his voice still shaky. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. "Not in all my years." His assistant nodded. She didn't just play music. She moved people, and that was the truth. Sister Catherine didn't play with flash or fame. She didn't need fast hands or fancy tricks. She simply played with honesty, with emotion, with memory, and the piano, which had sat through so many lifeless performances, finally came alive in her hands, back in her room that night. Catherine sat by her old piano again. She didn't play this time. She just touched the keys softly. Like greeting an old friend, she looked out her small window. The stars blinking above, she whispered to herself, "Thank you," not to the crowd, not to the applause, but to the music that had stayed with her all these years. The song had ended, but its echo remained. In the hearts of those who heard her, it would never fade. Someone in the crowd had filmed Sister Catherine's performance on their phone. The video wasn't planned. It was shaky, a little blurry, but the sound was clear. The soft first note, the rising melody, the final deep silence, it was all there that night. The video was uploaded to the internet with a simple title, "Elderly Nun Stuns Everyone with Piano Performance Within a Few Hours." It had a few hundred views, but by morning it had thousands. By the next day, it had crossed 1 million. People from all over the world were watching it on phones, laptops, televisions, in cafes, in schools, in churches. Even in homes where people didn't normally care about classical music. Something about that video touched people deeply. It wasn't just about her skill, it was the feeling. Her calm hands, her peaceful face. The way she closed her eyes while playing it reminded people of something pure. Something real. One comment read, "I was having a bad day, but this gave me peace." Another wrote, "I don't know why I'm crying, but I can't stop." And someone else said, "She played like her soul was singing." News channels picked it up next. They called the convent, asking for interviews, radio shows. Talked about it. Who is Sister Catherine? They asked, where has she been all these years? Famous musicians shared the video on their social pages. Some called her a forgotten legend. Others called her a reminder of why music matters. Still, Sister Catherine stayed silent. She didn't post online. She didn't answer reporters. She continued her simple life, teaching children, praying, walking slowly down the convent halls. When the head nun showed her a newspaper with her photo on the front page, Catherine just smiled and said, "The music did its job. That is enough." But it wasn't enough for the world. People started visiting the convent. Some left flowers at the gate, others sent letters, drawings, gifts. A little boy from Canada sent her his toy piano with a note. "You inspired me," it said. "Now I want to play too." A group of young girls from Japan made a video playing the same piece she had performed, and they dedicated it to her every day. More stories poured in, people learning piano again, families coming closer, old musicians returning to their instruments. It was like her music had unlocked something in everyone's hearts. The event organizer, Mr. Reynolds, was invited to speak on TV. He told the story of how she had quietly asked to play, how they nearly said no, and how she had changed everything. He looked into the camera and said, "Sometimes we forget to listen to quiet voices. But quiet doesn't mean weak. It can mean powerful." The music school that once ignored her now wanted to honor her. They offered her a place as a guest teacher. She politely said no. "I belong where I've always been," she said, with those who are still learning to believe in themselves. A famous pianist, whose fingers had filled concert halls for years, came to visit her in person. He brought flowers, bowed deeply before her, and said, You reminded me what music is really about." She didn't ask for praise. She just poured him tea and asked if he'd like to meet the children she teaches. That was Sister Catherine, not a star, not a name on posters, but a light in quiet places. 1. Afternoon, a young news reporter asked her gently, "Why didn't you ever go back to the big stages?" She thought for a moment and answered, "Because I never left music. I just took it where it was needed most," she added. "Fame fades, applause ends, but if one child learns to smile because of a song, then that music never ends." The video continued to spread. It reached people in hospitals, in prisons, in lonely homes. People who felt forgotten suddenly felt seen, because they saw a Haran old woman who had been invisible in a crowded hall, but who carried a melody that could move the world. And when she touched the keys, she didn't just play music. She reminded the world to feel again. The old piano sat quietly in the middle of the hall. No one played it now, but it had become something special. People came from far away just to see it. Next to the piano stood a small gold plaque. It read, "She asked for nothing and gave everything." It didn't say her full name. It didn't list her awards or history, just those simple words, because that was all people needed to know. This piano once belonged to Sister Catherine, the same nun who had shocked the world with a 5-minute song. But more than that, it had belonged to someone who taught the world something it had forgotten how to feel. Children from all over now came to this place, not for a show, but to learn to sit where she once sat, to press the keys softly. The way she did. Some came with parents, some came alone. Some couldn't even play music, but they wanted to be near that piano, because when they sat near it, they felt peace, like the music had never left. The hall where she had once been laughed at was now filled with respect and quiet wonder. People didn't joke anymore. They whispered. They sat gently, like they were visiting something holy every year, on the same day she performed. The school held a concert in her memory, but no one tried to copy her music. Instead, they told her story, a story of a woman who had waited, who had been ignored, who had been patient, and who, when given a small chance, chose to lift the world with kindness, not anger. Some students who had mocked her years ago were now grown. They came back, every year sitting in the back row quietly, wiping tears as they remembered. One of them had become a teacher and told her students, "The best music doesn't come from your hands, it comes from your heart." And when people asked how he knew that, he would smile and say, "Because I saw it, I saw her." Sister Catherine never returned to big stages. She never signed music deals or wore medals. She stayed at her small convent, teaching poor children who had no money but had dreams when she passed away. It wasn't announced in newspapers first. It was told through word of mouth. One student called another, and another. By the end of the day, people across the world cried, not just because she was gone, but because she had changed them, quietly, forever. The video of her performance was now part of history. It was played in schools, shown in churches, and even used in therapy centers to calm people's minds. Some hospitals played it for patients before surgery. Some schools used it during exams to help students focus. Her music became more than a performance. It became a healing sound. A little girl once came to the hall with her grandmother and asked, "Is this the piano the angel played?" Her grandmother smiled and nodded. "Yes, baby, that's the one." And the girl looked at it with wide eyes, not fully understanding, but feeling something warm inside. The world never forgot Sister Catherine, not because she was famous, but because she was real. She didn't chase lights. She didn't demand attention. She waited, she trusted, and when her time came, she gave the world a gift they didn't even know they needed, a reminder that sometimes the strongest voices are the quietest, that wisdom doesn't always wear shiny clothes, that love can live in music, even when spoken by old hands, and that The most powerful moment of a lifetime can happen in just 5 minutes. So today, in that same hall, children still play. They laugh, they learn. And when they sit at the piano, they are told her story first, not to copy her, but to understand what it means to truly give, to play from a place of truth, to share without asking. Because the song she played didn't end that night. It lives on in every child who believes in music, in every heart that remembers her. The song never needed words. It was her life, turned into sound. And even though she is gone, the melody still plays softly, forever.